Welcome back to a quiet space where we slow down together, not to escape life, but to understand it. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you something. When was the last time your mind became completely silent, not distracted, not asleep, not exhausted after a long day, but truly, deeply, still? Perhaps you remember sitting alone one evening, hoping for just a few peaceful minutes. You closed your eyes, took a slow breath, and waited. Instead, thoughts rushed in from every direction. A conversation you wish had gone differently, an email you forgot to send, a mistake from years ago that somehow still visits you at 3 a.m, plans for tomorrow, fears about next month, questions with no clear answers. The harder you tried to push them away, the stronger they became. It's almost as if the mind refuses to obey the very moment we ask it to be quiet. If this has ever happened to you, you're not failing at meditation. You're experiencing something profoundly human. Today, millions of people are searching for inner peace. Meditation apps promise calm in 10 minutes. Motivational videos promise a new mindset. Countless techniques promise to silence your thoughts forever. Yet many people eventually walk away disappointed. I can't meditate. My mind is too busy. I've tried everything. But what if the problem was never your mind? What if the struggle began with one simple misunderstanding? Many people believe meditation means forcing the mind into complete emptiness. No thoughts, no emotions, no movement. Like turning off a machine with the push of a button. It sounds peaceful, but have you ever noticed what happens the moment someone tells you, "Don't think about a pink elephant"? Instantly, the image appears. The mind doesn't respond well to force. The more tightly we grip it, the more it slips through our fingers. Trying to control every thought is a little like standing in the ocean, shouting at the waves to stop. The waves aren't the problem. The ocean is simply doing what oceans do. And perhaps, the mind is simply doing what minds have always done. This simple realization changes everything. Because maybe peace isn't something we create. Maybe peace is something we uncover. After we stop fighting what is already there. More than 2,500 years ago, one man discovered exactly this. Before the world called him the Buddha, he was simply Siddhartha Gautama, a prince who had abandoned unimaginable comfort, not because he wanted adventure, but because one question refused to leave him. Why do human beings suffer, even when they seem to have everything? That question led him away from palaces, into forests, across rivers. Through years of relentless searching, he studied under the greatest meditation masters of his time. He mastered their teachings. People admired him, yet deep inside, he knew something was still missing. Knowledge had not ended suffering, so he searched even harder. Eventually, his search became a battle against his own body. He believed that if desire caused suffering, then destroying every desire must lead to freedom. He ate almost nothing. His ribs pressed against his skin. His muscles disappeared. Ancient texts describe him becoming so thin that touching his stomach allowed him to feel his spine. Every breath demanded effort. Every movement became painful. His body grew weaker with each passing day. Yet something remarkable happened. His suffering increased, but wisdom did not. His body approached death, but liberation remained just beyond reach. Imagine spending 6 years believing you are only one more step away from the greatest discovery of your life, only to realize you have been walking in the wrong direction. For many people, that realization would have meant defeat. For Siddhartha, it became the beginning of genuine understanding. One quiet day, too exhausted to continue forcing himself, he accepted a simple bowl of milk rice offered by a village girl. To those around him, it looked like surrender. Some of his companions even abandoned him, believing he had given up the spiritual path. But sometimes, what appears to be giving up is actually letting go. His strength slowly returned, not because comfort was the answer, but because clarity requires balance. Then, something unexpected happened. A forgotten memory quietly surfaced. He remembered being a child, sitting beneath the gentle shade of a rose apple tree while his father worked nearby. There had been no struggle, no ambition, no effort to become enlightened, only a calm awareness, soft, natural, and deeply peaceful. For the first time in years, he asked himself a question that changed the course of history. What if awakening isn't found through force, but through letting go? That single question opened a door no one had fully understood before. It marked the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Not a journey toward controlling the mind, but toward understanding it. And before that understanding could deepen, Siddhartha first had to see something that every one of us still experiences today. the invisible forces that quietly disturb the mind, even when the world around us seems perfectly still. And before that understanding could deepen, Siddhartha first had to recognize something that every one of us still experiences today: the invisible forces that quietly disturb the mind, even when the world around us seems perfectly still. At first glance, it seems as though peace is something we must create. We search for the perfect meditation technique, the perfect breathing method, the perfect environment. We believe that if we could only find the right method, our minds would finally become calm. But Siddhartha was beginning to see something entirely different. Perhaps peace had never disappeared. Perhaps it had simply been covered. Imagine standing before a clear mountain lake at sunrise. The water is naturally transparent. You can see smooth stones resting quietly at the bottom. Then the wind begins to blow. The surface trembles. The reflection breaks apart. The lake hasn't lost its clarity. It has only lost its stillness. Our minds are much the same. Beneath every anxious thought, every painful memory, every restless desire, there already exists a quiet awareness. Not something we need to build, something we have forgotten how to notice. This realization led Siddhartha toward one of the most practical discoveries in Buddhist psychology. He stopped asking, "How do I control the mind?" Instead, he asked, "What keeps disturbing it?" The answer came in the form of 5 simple observations. Not mystical forces, not punishments, not signs that anyone is spiritually inadequate. They were simply habits of the human mind, patterns that appear again and again whenever awareness begins to fade. The Buddha would later call them the 5 Hindrances. The first is sensual desire. It rarely announces itself dramatically. Instead, it whispers, just one more notification, just one more video, just one more scroll, just one more purchase, just one more achievement. Have you ever picked up your phone for only a moment, then looked up to discover that 20 minutes had disappeared? Nothing forced you to stay. The mind simply kept reaching for the next pleasant experience. Like drinking salty water to satisfy thirst, the more it consumes, the more it wants. The second hindrance is ill will. Think about the last harsh words someone spoke to you. Perhaps they happened this morning. Perhaps they happened years ago. The other person has continued living their life. Yet your mind keeps reopening the same conversation. You replay every sentence. You imagine better responses. You relive the same emotion, again and again. The original moment lasted only minutes. The suffering continues because the mind refuses to let it end. The third hindrance is restlessness and worry. Modern life almost celebrates this state. Our calendars are full. Our phones never stop vibrating. Even when we finally sit down to rest, the body becomes still, but the mind keeps traveling. It wanders into tomorrow's meeting, next month's bills, a future conversation that may never happen, without taking a single step. We exhaust ourselves by walking through imaginary worlds. Then there is sloth and torpor. This is not ordinary fatigue after a long day. It is the quiet heaviness that settles over awareness itself. Have you ever read an entire page, only to realize you remember none of it? Or driven home, without recalling most of the journey? The body was present, the mind was somewhere else. Like thick morning fog covering a valley, everything becomes dull, slow, and unclear. Finally comes perhaps the most deceptive hindrance of all, doubt. Not the curiosity that leads to wisdom, but the voice that quietly says, "This probably won't work. I'm not the kind of person who can meditate. My mind is simply too broken." Ironically, many people abandon meditation before they have truly begun. If these 5 hindrances sound familiar, that is because they belong to no particular culture, no particular religion, and no particular century. They appear in ancient forests. They appear in crowded cities. They appear in boardrooms, classrooms, family dinners, and lonely bedrooms at 2 o'clock in the morning. Technology has transformed the world beyond recognition. Human consciousness has changed very little. When Siddhartha recognized these 5 hindrances, something remarkable happened. For the first time, he stopped fighting his own mind. He understood that these experiences were not permanent. They were conditions, and whatever arises because of conditions can also fade when those conditions change. Just as clouds cannot stain the sky, these hindrances cannot stain the true nature of awareness. They only pass across it. The question was no longer, how do I force my mind to become peaceful? The real question became, what happens when these 5 disturbances quietly fall away? The answer would become the first great doorway of meditation, a state so gentle, yet so profound, that the Buddha described it as the beginning of a completely new way of experiencing the mind. This was the threshold, of the first jhana. The threshold of the first jhana is not crossed through effort, but through release. This is where many people become surprised, because the Buddha never described the first jhana as a reward for struggling harder. He described it as something that naturally appears. When the mind is no longer weighed down by the 5 hindrances, think about the feeling of walking into your home after carrying a heavy backpack all day. At first, you hardly notice how heavy it has become, but the moment you place it on the floor, your entire body feels lighter. Nothing new has been added. You have simply stopped carrying what was never meant to stay on your shoulders. The first jhana begins in much the same way. The mind doesn't become extraordinary. It simply becomes unburdened. This is why the ancient texts never describe the first jhana as an escape from reality. Instead, it is the first time we experience reality, without constantly wrestling against our own thoughts. As the hindrances settle, 5 beautiful qualities naturally begin to appear. The Buddha called them the Jhana factors. Each one unfolds quietly, almost like the opening petals of a lotus at sunrise. The first is vitakka, often translated as time's applied attention. Imagine holding a small candle on a windless night. You gently place it on a table. You don't throw it down. You don't force it into position. You simply place it there, carefully, steadily. Vitakka is just like that. It is the gentle movement of bringing the mind back to its chosen object. Perhaps the breath, perhaps loving kindness, perhaps simple awareness itself. There is no violence, no struggle, only a quiet beginning. Then comes vikara, or time-sustained attention. If vitakka is placing the candle on the table, vikara is allowing the flame to burn without constantly touching it. Imagine a bee resting over a blooming lotus. It doesn't crash into the flower. It doesn't dart away every second. It simply remains, softly, naturally. This gentle staying is vikara. Many beginners believe meditation is about repeatedly dragging the mind back every few seconds. But something remarkable begins to happen when attention settles. The mind gradually stops running away, not because it has been imprisoned, but because it has finally found somewhere peaceful to rest. And then, without warning, another experience quietly appears. Not because you chase it, not because you deserve it, but because the mind is finally no longer scattered. The Buddha called this piti. People often translate it as joy or rapture, yet neither word fully captures the experience. Imagine standing on a mountain just before sunrise. For a few moments, the world is completely silent. Then the first golden light spills across the horizon. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet every part of you feels quietly alive. That gentle wave of aliveness is closer to piti than excitement. It is not the thrill of getting something new. It is the relief of no longer being divided within yourself. Sometimes meditators describe it as warmth spreading through the body. Others feel lightness. Some experience goosebumps. Some feel as though an invisible weight has quietly disappeared. The experience differs from person to person, but its source remains the same: a mind becoming unified. As the brightness of piti settles, it gradually softens into something even deeper. This is sukha. If piti is like the excitement of seeing the first rays of morning sunlight, sukha is like sitting peacefully beneath that warm light, asking for nothing more. There is no craving, no urgency, no need for the next pleasant experience. Only contentment. Simple, stable, complete. Perhaps every one of us has tasted a tiny glimpse of sukha without realizing it. Watching rain fall against the window, listening to waves after everyone else has gone home, holding a sleeping child, walking alone beneath a quiet evening sky. For a brief moment, nothing is missing. The mind stops negotiating with reality. It simply rests. Finally, these qualities gather together into what the Buddha called ekaggata, one-pointedness. Many people misunderstand this phrase. They imagine squeezing the mind into an impossibly narrow focus. But one-pointedness is not tension. It is harmony. Imagine an orchestra before the conductor arrives. Every instrument is playing something different. Each musician is talented, yet together, they create only noise. Now imagine the conductor gently raising a hand, without force, without shouting. Every instrument begins following the same rhythm. Nothing has been removed. Everything has become unified. That is ekaggata, calm. The scattered parts of the mind slowly begin moving together. For the first time, thinking, feeling, attention, and awareness are no longer pulling in different directions. This is why the first jhana feels so profoundly peaceful. Not because the world has disappeared, not because sounds have vanished, not because thoughts have been completely erased. You may still hear birds singing outside. You may still notice the gentle movement of your breath. The world remains exactly where it has always been. What changes is your relationship to it. Instead of being dragged from one thought to another, you discover an inner place that remains steady, even while life continues to unfold. For many people, this alone would seem like the destination, a mind that no longer feels constantly divided, a peace unlike anything they have experienced before. Yet as Siddhartha rested more deeply within this remarkable stillness, he noticed something almost invisible. Even this beautiful state contained the faintest trace of effort, and that subtle discovery would open the door to an even deeper silence. The first jhana is peaceful, wonderfully peaceful. Yet Siddhartha noticed something that most people would never have seen. Even in this quiet state, the mind was still doing something. It was still gently placing its attention, still sustaining its attention. Vitakka and vikara were beautiful tools, but they were still movement. Imagine learning to ride a bicycle. In the beginning, every movement requires attention. Your hands grip the handlebars. Your eyes constantly search for balance. Your mind quietly repeats, "Don't fall, don't fall." But after enough practice, something changes. You no longer think about balancing. Balance simply happens. What once required effort becomes effortless. Meditation unfolds in much the same way. At first, vitakka and vikara gently guide the mind. But once stability becomes natural, the mind no longer needs those gentle instructions. They fall away by themselves, not because someone forces them to disappear, but because they have already completed their work. This marks the beginning of the second jhana. Ancient texts sometimes describe it as entering noble silence, not because the world has become silent, but because something far more important has become silent. The endless conversation inside your own head. Think for a moment about how rarely this happens. From the moment we wake up, our minds begin talking, planning, comparing, remembering, judging, imagining, commenting on everything we see. Even while speaking to another person, a second conversation often continues quietly inside us. What should I say next? Did they misunderstand me? I hope I didn't sound foolish. Most of us have lived with this inner narrator for so long that we mistake it for ourselves. The second jhana reveals something astonishing. Awareness does not disappear when thinking becomes quiet. In fact, awareness becomes clearer than ever before. Imagine standing beside a great waterfall. At first, the roar is so loud, you cannot hear anything else. Then, as you walk farther away, the sound gradually fades. Suddenly, you begin noticing birds singing, leaves moving gently in the wind, water flowing over distant stones. Those sounds were always there. They had simply been hidden beneath the noise. Our thoughts work in much the same way. When their constant commentary grows quiet, awareness itself becomes easier to hear. This is why the second jhana often feels surprisingly intimate. There is no dramatic vision, no supernatural experience, only an extraordinary simplicity. The mind rests, without needing to remind itself how. And because this stability is now completely natural, joy begins changing as well. In the first jhana, piti arose because the mind had escaped distraction. Now, its source becomes even deeper. The joy no longer depends upon leaving something behind. It flows directly from the remarkable steadiness of awareness itself. Imagine sitting beside a lake after the wind has completely disappeared. There are no ripples left, no waves, no disturbance. The surface reflects the moon so perfectly that you cannot tell where the water ends and the sky begins. That is the feeling ancient teachers tried to describe. Not excitement, not emotional intensity, but profound inner stability. Yet Siddhartha continued, observing carefully. His curiosity had become incredibly refined. He no longer asked, "Is this peaceful?" He asked, "Is there still anything here that moves?" The answer was yes. Although thinking had become silent, there remained another subtle movement. Piti, the joyful energy that had accompanied the journey this far. Beautiful though it was, it still carried a gentle vibration, like the ringing of a bell, long after it has been struck. And Siddhartha realized something extraordinary. If the mind could let go of thinking, perhaps it could also let go of even this beautiful joy. Not because joy was a problem, but because true freedom asks us to cling to nothing at all. This next step would be quieter than anything he had yet experienced. Less exciting, less emotional, yet infinitely more profound. Ahead lay a state where happiness itself would become peaceful, and where the deepest balance of the human heart would finally begin to reveal itself. This was the path toward the third jhana.